The only difference is that when mesh seems to be closer to head of shear stud, then it gives better shear stud resistance. But we cannot generalize the things because it will depend where you're positioning the mesh. Now, in what situations do we use double layers if it is not helping increase stud strength? Again, in my perspective,
what is the effect of steel wire mesh position and the number of mesh layers on the strength of shear connectors?
This is a very interesting question, and luckily I did some testing on that during my PhD, so that's why I'm able to answer that question and otherwise I would have been in trouble. So this is the testing that I did as part of my PhD at University of Leeds. One is mesh on deck, directly on deck. Another is mesh which is 30 millimeter from slab top. So here you can see that we use these small chairs over here so that meshing is raised. This was the testing results. PTS1 is mesh on deck, PTS2 is mesh 30 millimeter from slab top. And interestingly, you can see that there isn't much difference. There isn't much quantifiable difference between mesh at top or mesh directly on steel deck. The only difference is that when mesh seems to be closer to head of shear stud, then it gives better shear stud resistance. But we cannot generalize the things because it will depend where you're positioning the mesh. And in my view, putting mesh on either top or 30 millimeter from top of the slab, it does not make much difference. And I think that this data is quite reliable. Now, how about number of layers? I think after we conducted this testing, Steel Construction Institute, in the UK, they have produced separate guidelines for number of mesh layers. And this is the testing for single stud and one mesh layer, and PTSNM is single stud, two mesh layers. So you can see that with two mesh layers, the stud capacity is a bit higher. But here in this testing, we applied 10% of the expected failure load as normal load as well. So in this case, not only we applied horizontal load, but we applied load at the top to mimic real life beam failure. But again, we were not able to get this 6 millimeter. The idea was that for ductile failure, we wanted to get 6 millimeter slip, but it did not happen. Although there is a 20% difference between these two, and I think Steel Construction Institute, they have produced the design guidelines as well, that the capacity should be more for double layers. But again, this is my personal view that the results, the evidence is not conclusive. That could be experimental error, or that could be due to 10% applied load, or that could be any other reason. So there is no marked difference between these two. Now, in what situations do we use double layers if it is not helping increase stud strength? Again, in my perspective, where you're using the slab, concrete slab, which has got lots of depth, for example, if you're using 60 millimeter decking and if you're using 250 millimeter concrete, then between 60 and the concrete depth is quite a lot. So we can have shrinkage cracks. To avoid those shrinkage cracks, we can use this double layer. But for increasing the stud strength, I don't think we should be using double layer. Again, this is another example for where we use double studs, and you can see that with double mesh layer the capacity is higher, and this is real experimental data.